Ranking of Kings is an immersive anime that was recently popular. Although there are many great things about it, it really stands out because it writes its villains exactly like Game of Thrones. Now, although I say villains, this extends to all antagonists, basically every character getting in the protagonist's way. Villain or not, having some kind of antagonist is part of the most basic building block in a story. And when this is executed well, it gives a compelling story. And on the other hand, when it's done terribly, the story kind of falls apart. In Ranking of Kings, there are 3 fundamental techniques to story and writing antagonists that prove that despite how lovable and how sympathetic we are to Boji, the real heroes carrying that story are the enemies that he faces. Now, the very first thing about each antagonist and really every side character in the story is that they are autonomous and they don't feel like they're arisen for the sake of the main character's story. In many works of fiction, side characters tend to feel like they've almost kind of just been waiting for the main character to show up. Now, this is different depending on the stories because some have prophecies in which characters are literally waiting for the main character to show up for a prophecy to be fulfilled. But most series don't have prophecies, so yeah, they just feel like they're waiting for no reason. Now, what I mean by waiting is that in many stories you have capable characters who it seems that they're just not doing anything apart from conveniently preparing themselves up until the main character is suddenly ready and then, they act. And sometimes you feel like, you just want to ask these villains, right? So what have you been waiting for, right? What have you done? Like if you did this plan 2 months ago, you probably would have succeeded, but you waited way too long until the main character was conveniently ready to take you down. Or maybe you wonder why the protagonist's friends have done basically nothing for so long given how, capable, skilled, strong they are. But Ranking of Kings doesn't do this. And it doesn't give any super niche reasons to try and explain these questions away. Each character in the story is currently in the middle of their own life, like doing their own story, and Boji is just kind of there and, entering the story and affecting them. For example, Kage, right? He isn't just wasting his life waiting for someone like Boji to come along. I mean, he is wasting his life, but, he's kind of just in the middle of his own journey, and then Boji comes along and gives him deeper purpose, but it kind of seems that he's not just waiting for someone to help him. He's just content with living the life that he's living. On top of this, apart from Kage, who is kind of an exception to this, all the characters in the story, despite helping Boji, are not actually helping him because he's a main character. Each and every one of those characters has something to gain from helping him. Whether, it's linked to some kind of physical gain like riches and all that kind of stuff, or intangible such as honor and duty, or maybe they're fighting some kind of mental battle, right? Now, this isn't to say that they don't want to actually just support Boji and see him win, but they also have their own things going for them. And this is just like Game of Thrones, right? Because there are so many characters with different ambitions and different desires and storylines in Game of Thrones. No character in that series simply helps another one because they're just so super capable and they just have nothing better to do with their lives. Each of them has their own ambition, their own pleasures, their own desires that they focus on. And for the most part, these things that they have existed before the main character came along into their lives. So, Ranking of Kings, Game of Thrones, it's the same thing. The main characters, support or villains, they all have their own lives before the main character comes along. The main character is just there and we're just following their story. They're not really just changing the world and everyone's been waiting for them for no reason, even though there's no prophecy. Now, when I talk about reasons and motivations, I can't not talk about backstories. And in Ranking of Kings, each antagonist and full-on villain has a reason, right? None of them are simply bad for the sake of being bad. Not like, a lot of other series where you just have characters who want to rule the world or kill everyone just because that's kind of what they want to do. And, each of them in Ranking of Kings has a reason for why they became what they became. And it always makes you feel some kind of way deep down when you hear about it. Now, I should say it's definitely not necessary for characters to all have sad or sympathetic backstories for it to be good, but you just kind of need reasons to explain why the character is how they are. Just like Game of Thrones, once again, every character there has a reason to do what they do. Like, no matter how simple or complex, whether you agree with it or not, they have reasons. So yeah, characters don't need sad backstories, but it's definitely nice when they do. In the series of Ranking Kings, we also do have many characters who like Boji, but at some point hindered him in his journey, right? And it's only later on that we find logical reasons as to why they did so, either relating to Boji himself or themselves. They have their reasons based off of their story and life situation. And this makes us take a harder look at the characters as more than just props that fulfill certain roles in the story or certain archetypes that we need to complete the story around the main character. Each of them is alive and multidimensional, and just like in real life, you can't judge them too soon. You need to take time, and we need to all understand them and why they became this way to really appreciate the story. And once you appreciate the story, you realize what every character is. Every character is their own person. And as a person, they value their own ways of thinking, beliefs, and priorities like any other regular person would in the real world. They don't simply bend over for the main character, Boji, just because he's a main character. There are many side characters in other stories who initially have their own ambitions and reasons for doing stuff, but once the main character shows up, it seems these reasons are just now less important. Now, it does make sense if you're looking at the story from the main character's perspective. In that case, yes, everyone else's reasons and ambitions, they kind of pale in comparison to the main character. But that's not true for real people. Just because there's something important to the main character, it doesn't make it important to everyone else. Each character kind of just weighs everything and goes relative to their own situation, and then makes a judgment call based on what they think is best. And that's what's actually crazy about Ranking of Kings. Because the Ranking of Kings is a story that has a royal family, knights, and gods, and normally you would expect in a story like this that there would be a lot of blind obedience. But that is not true at all. We still see each and every character think for themselves about what is the best course of action they should take, and they aren't persuaded by, the priorities that other characters have, no matter what kind of authority that character has over, any kind of side character. They all choose to think for themselves. For example, take Appice, right? Even when he recognizes that he's probably on the wrong side of this battle, we see him still struggle mentally with how to approach everything, with how he feels indebted to both sides and how he feels he should relate to both sides. Which makes sense because we as people all have either people or things that we follow or do that we just feel compelled to do them despite knowing that we probably shouldn't do or follow those people. And it's a genuine human dilemma, right? And you could say this is, a bit similar to Theon from Game of Thrones without trying to spoil too much about Game of Thrones. A great example of everything I'm trying to get at is Queen Hilling from Ranking of Kings. When we first meet her, she's clearly just busy with helping the king make executive decisions in the country. She's raising her son Daida. She's not simply doing nothing until she meets Boji and Boji's in a situation that needs helping, right? She has her own interests and ambitions she's trying to fulfill. And then after King Boss dies, we find out she's the reason Boji did not become king, right? And then now she's an antagonist in the story, kind of stopping Boji on his way to the throne. However, as we keep going through the story, we get more information and we view the situation from her perspective as a mother, and then it becomes obvious, why she would be an antagonist, and why despite everything that Boji wanted and how strong he was being, she wouldn't want to let him sit on the throne. It becomes obvious that she wouldn't want to put such a difficult and heavy burden of being a king on the shoulders of a small, frail, and deaf boy who was literally told that he will never become any stronger. More so given the fact that he'd have to fulfill his father's literal giant shoes in being a king, which is bound to cause all sorts of insecurities and mental health issues for a kid. And that's just, anyone can see that. In the end, her love for Boji doesn't stop her from making a logical decision that any of us would have made if we had to decide a successor after King Boss died. She's an antagonist who has her own life, and despite knowing Boji as the main character, she still makes decisions for herself based on her own perspective of the matter and her own priorities. And you can literally do this for any and all antagonists in the series, although there may be some exceptions, but it works out. The antagonists just make sense. They feel like real people with varied emotions and dilemmas. As real and relatable as Boji is, Ranking of Kings also writes antagonistic characters that are real. It doesn't matter how big or small their role in the story is, each of them acts and thinks independently, acting as the main characters in their own stories. And that's why it's not just Boji who carries the story, it's all of them, because each character has their own agency. Thanks for watching this video. Now you know more about villains and antagonists, but if you want to know more about history and fables and how to use them as inspirations for a story plot, then go watch this video over here. I talk about Attack on Titan and how it wrote a World War II story, as well as a Jack and the Beanstalk story. Oh yeah, and by the way, do that thingamabob that lets me know what you think about the video. And yeah, I think that should be it. That's everything I'm supposed to say.